found a skeleton, how would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I don't know research on that.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Dapper Reacts. I am here once again with Vishanti, who has some coffee, as do I. We're ready to go, because it's not late enough for me to start drinking alcohol. It's not late enough for me to stop drinking caffeine either. So, Vishanti, how are you?
Well.
Good.
Candidly, that's well, comma, not like well is the response. Well, candidly, I am very stressed out searching for a roommate / housing in LA and Orange County is extremely stressful.
Yes.
So that has been trying.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah.
Housing in California generally is awful, and in that area, it's like
just overpriced for no reason.
Oh, for bad reasons. There are reasons. They're just all bad reasons.
Like I said, no good reason.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you said no reason. My bad on that one.
Oh, I would say no reason, but at minimum, it's no good reason.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, guys, in addition to all that craziness that's been going on this week behind the scenes, there's going to be craziness on stream. Because we have Finding Truth and Rebecca. Finding Truth is, of course, an engineer, as the Salem hypothesis is holding strong. For those of you who don't know, the Salem hypothesis basically says that when a creationist claims to have some kind of academic or scientific credentials, they are extremely likely to be an engineer rather than an actual research scientist in the field they're critiquing. It's not always the case. Like, we do have PhDs over at AIG and ICR, but it's very frequently the case. There are lots of hypotheses as to why the Salem hypothesis itself might seem to be so powerful. One of them is that engineers are trained to think in terms of design. Yeah, and so they see design everywhere, even when there isn't necessarily actual intentional design. Also, Valkyrie Vision has sent a super sticker with a cup of coffee that says "Tired" on it for $1.99. Thank you very much, Valkyrie Vision. All right, so I think we're just going to jump into it. When we last left off, Ahmed was telling us that evolution had nothing to do with biology. It was all about engineering, and that you can't use evolution to evolve new software programs, even though that's literally not true, and it's actually done fairly routinely.
I spent at least a good hour and a half in that simulator program that you linked us last week, so yeah,
good.
that was really fun.
Yeah, so if you're not sure what I'm talking about, just check back the last episode, and yeah, I linked to it's a simple evolution simulator that will have the evolution of autotrophs and heterotrophs and this whole environment, and you can get predators and all sorts of interesting behaviors.
Yeah, it's very cool.
And also, mass extinctions are a fairly frequent occurrence if you let that thing run very long.
Yep, I can confirm.
All right, guys, we're going to hit play. And we're going to see what else Rebecca and Ahmed have. Normally, I would back up a few seconds to see where we were. I don't care. I'm just going to hit play.
And we know that accumulation of glitches in software causes it not to work.
So, that's not always true. First of all, I think one of the things we have to talk about is the word glitch, right? Creationists like to talk about mutations as copying errors or glitches or mistakes. And in the one sense, that's kind of true, right? There are mechanisms that that biological cells use to try to keep their DNA as consistent as possible. But life also depends on new mutations in other ways. And so they're not perfect. In fact, there is a idea in evolutionary biology called evolvability, and that's selectable. And we're going to read a quick super chat from Scott Duke for $4.99, who says, "I'd like to buy 5 yodels for Vishanti, please."
Unfortunately, inflation has affected all of us, so I had to set the minimum to 10. But I'll give you half a yodel.
Okay.
Yodel, and that's like it.
That's a half a yodel, huh?
That's a half a yodel. For
okay.
now. Yeah.
So Evolvability is basically the ability of a population to adapt to new circumstances, and things that actually enhance this can be increases in mutation rate. So, what evidence of there, you might ask? Or what evidence is there of this, you might ask? Well, there's this thing called the Lenski long-term E. coli experiment, in which Dr. Lenski set up in his lab 5 different lineages of E. coli in an experimental situation, which was very artificial, but also very tightly controlled. And so they take samples every day to freeze so they can sequence the genome or thaw them out to do further experiments on previous steps. They keep very careful track of the whole thing. Real quick, Vandelli1998, who's been a member for 26 months at the Amniote level, says, if anyone is interested, I will be up in 7 hours. Eric Virtaler and I will be talking about the multiverse of the Halloween movies. Ooh, including Season of the Witch, I hope.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How about
So anyway, some of the lines in the Lenski long-term experiment have become what's called hypermutator lines, where they have through-the-roof mutation rates. Now, one of the things that this means is that some of the bacteria are always going to be very, very fit, but a large number are also always going to be very, very unfit in that condition. However, because the very, very fit ones have crazy amounts of reproductive success, and because some of their offspring will retain high fitness phenotypes, the hypermutator strain survives. So in some circumstances, it's actually good to raise your mutation rate. And how do we know? Well, we watched it happen in a lab in real time, in real living organisms. I mean, that's the kind of thing that creationists are always asking for, right? Like, you can't do this in a lab. Well, you kind of can. We did, and it turns out it does work.
How about that?
Weird, right? All right, we'll keep going.
So the other one tells him, well, guess what? For us, it didn't work, but it seems that those guys were so lucky, okay?
Oh, we're still doing our hypothetical aliens have dug up the remains of human civilization, and they're arguing whether or not human operating systems like Windows and Mac OS evolved or were created. And for $1.99, Scott Duke says, I was buying Yodels for Vishanti to replenish her supply.
Oh, thank you.
There you go.
That's amazing. Also, Nebulon, will that money make it to Vishanti? It makes its way to me, not in the direct form.
You could ask for proceeds from
I'm
Super
not
Chats.
going to do that. That's
Okay.
no. This is your channel. I will yodel for fun.
Okay.
Besides, the time we watch spooky movies, that more than makes up for it.
Oh, okay. I get it.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
apparently, we'll stop watching spooky movies if people stop super chatting.
Well, we'll do it. I might just not watch as many. I don't know. This is not a one-to-one here.
Okay. DM Wing for $20 says, probably not going to be able to stick around, so here's to Vishanti yodeling.
Oh. What have I created?
Well, now you have to yodel $20 worth. I think that's 2 whole yodels.
Well, I'm still waiting for my supply to reach.
Oh, okay.
I'm on tilt right now.
All right, well, we'll hit play again.
To the extent that, maybe they had all 7 billion people on the planet having PCs in every home, and every PC had so many glitches, not like our computers that are glitch-proof, and that those glitches...
I like that the aliens just have glitch-proof computers. That's handy.
Right.
It doesn't mean anything. It's just like, oh, okay. Interesting world building you got going on there.
is because those guys were, all the time copying software over the internet. So every day there were new 7 billion copies.
Do you think he realizes that he's actually just describing computer viruses, and that computer viruses do actually have mutations that then enhance their effectiveness at what they do?
I don't think that he's thought this all the way through.
Okay.
Of the
I
same
could
software.
be wrong.
So
I could too. I don't know all of his areas of expertise. No. Except that he's studied Islamic theology, which is very important for him to tell all of us.
All right.
Which, I mean, good for him. I just don't particularly care.
with all those repetitions, okay, it happened. So the other guy tells him, give me proof. So the Darwinian guy or the autonomous evolutionist guy would say, the proof is that it happened. This is my proof. Okay?
Okay, so he's taking a bad analogy, and I think he's currently making it even worse, right? So let's say that we actually do have the situation, right? Like, we're aliens, hundreds of thousands or millions of years. Well, okay, probably not millions, because I don't think any surviving computers would be okay. But let's just say, I don't know, neutron bombs happen, and all of humanity is just gone, but all of our like tech is more or less intact. Okay, so then a few thousand years later, aliens show up. They're going to do some xenoarchaeology on Earth. They see that there's the remains of cities, and they find these big boxes full of things like, silica and transistors and stuff. Because basically, physics is physics. So if they have computers, they probably work on at least broadly similar kinds of bases, where they have like switching signals and some kind of analog for transistors to hold signals and all that kind of stuff, right? Cool. And then they figure out how to boot up our computers. They figure out whether they're taking, 50 or 60 hertz and whatever AC, depending on where you're living, because for some reason there's different standards around the world for that. Figure all this stuff out, right? Okay, so then I have this hypothesis. I'm the evolutionary software developer guy for the aliens. And I say, well, I think the humans probably used evolutionary algorithms to develop these bits of software. And that this was a distributed sort of peer-to-peer network where the best software packages for operating systems would be distributed according to some kind of fitness evaluation. And then there would be mutations along with the distribution. Okay, that's a hypothesis. So what do we do to check with this? Well, it's pretty easy, right? Check to see if you can actually get the raw code for each instance of Windows. I think we are buffering.
Oh.
Uh-oh. Action looks good on my end. Why, YouTube?
It hates you. It must.
Really does. Okay. Sorry about that. I don't think we're still buffering. So there's that. Anyway, so we download the full raw code, right? We put it into an analysis, a phylogenetic analysis. And what would actually happen if, in fact, that's how the software was developed, you would find that each instance has its own unique mutations, some of which are probably even neutral, right? Like some of them might just be, you know how comments in code works, right? You put it between some brackets and it doesn't actually do anything. It just tells people who look at the code like, oh, hey, this is what this section does. So maybe there's bits of like commentary that change, or even functional changes, right? That maybe have two different types of code that end up doing the same thing because, in coding, similar but not identical to genetics, there's usually more than one way to skin a cat. And so then you could look at a phylogeny of these different operating system codes, and you would find a nested hierarchy within them that you could trace. Interestingly, similar to the way that we have manuscript families for things like biblical texts. Yeah, because that's a thing. You can tell which texts were copied from common sources based on shared changes that they have from copyist errors and scribal emendations and things like this. So you could do the same thing with the Windows code. Okay, so we test it, and what do we find? Well, we actually find that what's happening is instead we have these non-nested but still hierarchical versions that occur and then just become widely distributed as you go forward through time, right? Because presumably find some computers from different times because, there's still some old computers somewhere in a dump or something that have an old version of Windows or Mac OS or whatever. And so that just confirms my hypothesis. There isn't this nested hierarchy that occurs there where you can trace mutations, quote unquote, in different lineages. So my hypothesis has been disconfirmed. We know that's not how it happened. So what's the other option? Well, the guy who's the software engineer among the aliens comes in and says, well, what if we did it the way I do my software development? Which is to say, I consciously make changes, test those changes, fix them where I need to, and then distribute that to all my users. What predictions will we make? Oh, exactly what we find in the actual archaeological record of the human computing history. Problem solved. That's the thing. You can tell the difference between these things. And when you look at life, it looks like the branching nested hierarchy that you get from descent with modification. And it does not look like the stepwise broad distribution at various times that you get with intentional design, which would what we would expect if there were intentional design, would be that. And it would be similar to things like, if you're an old Earth creationist, it would be similar to things like, what do you call it? Goodness, now I can't think of it. It was a thing that a lot of people believed back when they realized that there was a fossil record, and that there had been previous paleofaunas that were replaced by God. And it was basically God was, in fact, releasing, like, updates to the biosphere version. Gonna patch the biosphere, gonna get rid of the dinosaur creation. That's the word I was thinking of. Progressive creation. Yeah. So software follows the progressive creation model. Life doesn't. Anyway, here we go.
And then you tell him, okay, so your theory must have some predictions to it.
Oh, hey,
what would those predictions be?
Exactly what I was
saying. You're telling me that MS-DOS, which is a command prompt-based shell operating system, converted through glitches to the software that are filtered by the market forces of picking the best glitched software, to the extent that it became Windows 3.1, which has graphical interface, completely different look and feel.
And remember, we already know what the actual predictions would be, because we know how that would work.
And you're saying that this is an accumulation of glitches, so we should find from the last MS-DOS to the first Windows 3.1 to the first GUI Windows operating system, we should find all those transitions, okay? From an MS-DOS with very little graphical features, to one with more graphical features, to one with a better graphical features.
While this goes on, I'm going to put on a little slideshow.
Etc., etc. And guess what? We look into the software fossil record and we find nothing of the sort. You find the MS-DOS and then suddenly Windows 3.1. There's nothing in between. All right?
Yeah, totally unlike fossil record of Earth. Weird.
But then somebody comes and says, hey, we found some
etc.
MS-DOS programs on one of those software data banks that had graphical interfaces prior to the invention of 3.1. And then you tell them, okay, let's compare actually the code that is in these programs. Does it lend itself to being a transitionary step? And then you find that it's not a transitionary step, that it has developed as a graphical interface software on its own path. And then the other guy says, hey, I got you. This is clear evidence to the ingenuity of those human beings who were designing this software, because they had the idea of wanting to deliver software that has graphical interfaces and that has multi-threading, that has better communication abilities, and that has programs that has icons and that's controlled by a mouse, and that all the features of a Windows or a GUI-led software versus a command prompt software.
How long can Ahmed take to make one point? That's the new, like, time to beat, right? Like, how long can he take saying this basically just variation of the same thing over and over again? It's sort of like,
yeah,
he's got the same sort of problem there that, like, that Nephi or Otangelo have, where they're incapable of concision. It's just not a thing for them.
Yeah.
Which I think it was William Shakespeare who said that brevity is the soul of wit.
Yep.
Definitely
one of my favorite little sayings there.
Yeah. Now, I don't know how much of that is like Ahmed's not sure how to express himself well in English. His English is pretty good as far as I'm concerned. It's way better than my Arabic. But this is just a pro tip to anyone. If you can't condense your point down into like less than a paragraph in live conversation, maybe you need to tweak how you're arguing it. And I mean, granted, there's going to be exceptions, but like, if your point is we don't see the kind of distributed transitional forms of software that we would expect, and that's the same thing we see in the fossil record, which is what his point is. You could just use that sentence, that one sentence. You don't have to go into every single detail of what differentiates MS-DOS from Microsoft Windows. I feel like most people who are vaguely aware of the history of computing know what the basic differences are between a text prompt and a GUI. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, because I frequently am bad at figuring out what generally counts as common knowledge, so.
And this is why they were delivering software that had graphical interfaces over DOS. And then they said, guess what? We will even change the whole DOS itself into Windows. All right? And then somebody has said, whoa, stop there. We found another software called Mac OS. There is also a graphical interface.
Wait,
okay?
we found it, or
Well, so he's still doing where our alien archaeologist is digging up computers.
of course, okay.
Right.
Silly me. He meandered for so long, I lost the whole entire point.
I'm actually kind of wondering if he's going to view the entire talk from the premise of thinking about being alien archaeologists that come to a devastated Earth to investigate our computer operating systems. I was going to say it's sort of a weird thing to do, but then I realized like there are people who specialize in like minutia of like Sumerian life or something. Like, how did the Sumerians use the toilet? Like, a perfectly fine thing to study, I guess. So maybe it's not that weird.
That came into existence even on a completely independent path from the Microsoft path, which had MS-DOS and then had Windows. And those
Yep. Okay. Dude, get to a point. I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit because he needs to get to a point.
On with it.
Look, this is something I noticed when I moderated the debate between he and Jackson Wheat, right? There were frequently times when I said, all right, Ahmed, we get it. It's time to get to the conclusion or the next point or something. We're going to skip ahead a little bit and see if he's gotten to a point yet.
to the non-existence, non-existence
Right.
of evidence is not. So if you can keep extending this discussion.
Yeah.
So yeah, non-existence, that wouldn't be evidence. Unfortunately, when you tie this back to life, we do have transitional forms. Do we have all of them? No, we don't. Do we have a lot? Yeah. Should we have? Now I know that other people have come up with what I think are very obviously post hoc explanations for the existence of morphological transitions. For instance, Sal Cordova has an idea that God created all of these creatures, including transitional creatures, as some kind of like pedagogical, like for the pedagogical use by humans, so that they could study how biology works without dissecting humans. Even though I don't know if you guys know, but we still dissect humans, right? People donate their bodies to science, and one of the things that happens in those cases is that things like medical students dissect them. Because there really isn't a replacement for dissecting a human if you need to do things like surgery on humans. Right? Like that's... I don't care how many chimpanzees or rats you dissect. You're going to need to dissect a human if you want to be a surgeon. So it didn't even do the thing that Sal supposes that it is supposed to do. But also, it seems radically post hoc, right? Like, if God were like, oh, I'm going to create a group of living organisms that are just there to teach humans how to do medicine, why not just make another species that's physically identical to humans, except that it doesn't have whatever the imago Dei is, and perhaps is no more intelligent than, like, I don't know, a dog? Why not just do that? Physically, everything else is identical. Just do that. I mean, why rely on things like rats and, like, monkeys?
Yeah.
God could just do that thing. And then you say, well, I don't know, maybe there's ethical considerations there. Yeah, well, there's already ethical considerations with animal testing anyway. So I don't. It's a very weird thing, but at least it does give some reason why there would be intermediate organisms. But yeah, the thing is though, for years, including in many cases now, creationism has been saying there are no transitional fossils. They just don't exist. Which means that the actual prediction from special creation is that transitional fossils won't be found. And ever since evolution was first proposed, before Darwin, the prediction would be that there will be transitional fossils found. They have been found. I mean, it's a disconfirmation of special creation. The prediction didn't come true. The opposite prediction did. But anyway.
You will arrive at a certain point where you say, well, this autonomous software evolutionist guy is just throwing something because he doesn't want to acknowledge the ingenuity of the people who delivered this software. He does not buy the fact that they can reach to this technology, but he goes to select.
I would actually agree that in Ahmed's hypothetical, right, where we're the future archaeologists, finding the remains of computing systems from Earth, that it would be silly in the face of sufficient evidence of what actually happened to consider that operating systems did in fact come about through genetic algorithms. It's true. But again, that's not the situation we're in with biology. So I'm curious to see if Ahmed ever bothers to assert and defend the proposition that that reflects what we actually see in things like the fossil record or genetics.
An absurd path that what you do not think intelligence can do, you think randomness can do. And because you have...
Well, that's just demonstrable, right? So, for instance, neural webs can be evolved in computers that cannot actually be comprehended by humans. So, for instance, you guys, you know about those the AIs that take a text prompt and output an image, right? You guys have played around with those. Those are trained using things like genetic algorithms, right? Where they're given a whole bunch of text and images associated with the text and told to just go through and repeatedly take text prompts based on your data set, give outputs, and then whether or not those outputs are bad or good will then feed back into how strong those various connections should be. And no human can actually look at that neural net and actually figure out exactly what's going on in all of it. That's not a thing that humans can do. There's too many nodes, there are too many complex connections, and it doesn't actually matter because at the end of the day, the AI is still going to work. So it is true that humans do make software that they can't understand. In fact, it's one of the current concerns among both software and hardware that's being designed by genetic algorithm is that what if we come up with something that humans can't understand and therefore can't fix? Because that would be a problem. What if you couldn't troubleshoot a physical item that had been designed by AI that was very complicated and worked normally until it broke, but then when it broke, you didn't understand it well enough to fix it? It would be a thing. It's almost like how biology works, where sometimes you break a biological system and no one knows how to treat it. Almost like that's why medicine is a whole thing. The human body isn't just simple to understand. It's absurdly complex.
Weird.
Yeah, weird.
But is it irreducibly complex?
Well, so it depends on what definition of irreducible you're using. If you're using the original Behe definition, then yes, actually it is in many cases. Doesn't matter because irreducibly complex things... Yeah, irreducibly complex things under Behe's definition can and do evolve, even in historical times under human observation. But then if you go with the Otangelo version, where it's just anything that he currently doesn't know how it could have evolved, it just counts as irreducibly complex until you show that it could have evolved, and then it just never was in the first place, then it's a meaningless concept. So it doesn't actually make any sense to ask if anything is irreducibly complex, because everything both is and isn't simultaneously, depending on how the proponent of the idea feels. Which, by the way, is also the same argument that Sal Cordova uses. He just doesn't like to say irreducibly complex, but when you actually analyze the argument, he's using the same weak version of irreducible complexity. So, anyway.
Have no questions, and you're appealing to contingency of accumulation of errors that you cannot prove. You are just forcing your model without evidence, using your...
it's times like this when I wish I had a little like reaction video that's just a film projector.
You know what? I think that might be your next challenge.
Yeah, make a 3D film projector. That way I own the whole copyright and just have it project into a misty room onto a screen. Yeah, that might have to be my next thing.
Huge media horns. A horn like when you have a loudspeaker, and putting forward this paradigm for something else other than empirical evidence and other than being rational. This is, to me, the...
Sorry, I'm just laughing at how much a projection this is. Oh, and the thing is, like, he's picked something where, yeah, in the analogy, it actually does indicate intelligent design. But then he doesn't bother to notice how horribly that tracks onto the actual fossil record of Earth. And like, oh man, it's it's actually kind of hard to comprehend how he thinks that this is going to work out in his favor, except that Rebecca is a receptive audience who's unlikely to push back.
Eek.
Yeah.
One of the parallels between information theory and computer engineering and electronics and communication.
I think he's going to define information in a way that we can actually tell whether or not information is going up or down in organisms. I'm going to go ahead and say no.
I am real skeptical.
I mean, it would be great.
Engineering and this whole matter of theory of evolution. It starts as a linguistic trick. It develops into a philosophical.
Remember from last time, the linguistic trick is basically just that a single word in English doesn't always have to mean the exact same thing in all contexts.
Mm-hmm.
And that even though people aren't actually really being particularly tricky with the word or doing a whole lot of bait and switch with the meanings of the words, he just kind of doesn't like it that English doesn't have a single one word per concept like mapping of words, which is weird because Arabic doesn't either. But hey, you know. Oh, and Tommy Dragon has been a member for 7 months at the tetrapod level, but did not send a particular message. Tommy Dragon, if you want to send a message, just at me, and I will make sure to read it. Thank you very much for being a channel member. All right.
Standpoint, it ends into a pseudoscience.
Mackenzie Brown asked, is this the kind of video where Rebecca's going to respond, or is Finding Truth just giving his presentation?
So this is an interview between them. It's definitely not a debate or anything. I think she might end up asking questions, but I think for the most part, she's just going to be an audience member who nods along and provides the platform. Yeah.
Okay.
I think Rebecca's mostly just here because it happened on her channel at first. Although I did get it actually from Finding Truth channel, because Rebecca's channel is currently unavailable.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Apparently, she was getting some pushback from certain people that didn't make her feel particularly safe. So she's currently on hiatus, which I don't approve of any of that.
Yeah, that's the same kind of crap that happened to some other ladies in a different community, and it's just gross. Don't be a dick.
The problem I find with, especially when it comes to creationists, is that not only do a lot of anti-creationists not treat young Earth creationists very well, although not always to the point where they feel unsafe, but also male creationists on YouTube also tend to treat female creationists very, very poorly.
Yeah,
I remember,
not cool.
Yeah, I remember back on the Standings crew, there was a woman who would come around every once in a while, and they didn't bother to tone down the sexism when she was around. So surprise, surprise, she stopped showing up. Weird.
Yeah.
Scientific discussion based on no evidence, but primarily relying on the philosophical background that denies, number one, the existence of the designer, or
Dude,
denies...
that is such... Okay, there are so many things wrong with that. But first of all, projection. Second of all, science doesn't deny the existence of a designer. It doesn't necessitate one.
Mm-hmm.
It's doing just fine without using the get out of, whatever argument free card by saying, oh, well, we don't really understand it, so designer did it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the thing is, okay, there are anti-theists in science, right? But your average scientist does not particularly care about proving or disproving whether or not there's a god or a designer for the universe or anything like that.
Mm.
They just want to find out new stuff about the science. And if for some reason that strongly indicated some kind of design, then okay. Like if the crazy hollow moon idea, that the moon is actually a spaceship and inside it's hollow and it was put in place there by ancient astronauts or something. Like if there were actual evidence of that, like if we drilled through the moon and then there was like an internal architecture there, or like the seismograph readings from probes that have been sent to the moon came back with different information than they actually did and indicated that the moon was like hollow or something, I don't think people would just reject the design hypothesis, right? Because we know how things like spheres of rock form in space, but we don't know how hollow spheres full of alien technology would form in space. So it's pretty easy to infer design there. The problem is with life, we actually don't know any way to design life. We've never seen life be designed, but we have seen it evolve. And we have evidence of what it would look like if it had evolved. So it's not that we can't infer design or we refuse to infer design. It's that life doesn't actually bear any hallmarks of design that are unambiguous. And even in cases where it's not clear that how something evolved, that on its own is an indication of design. So
yeah. And one person in the chat was asking, so what's the point of Ahmed's rambling about Windows?
Oh, it's entirely that Ahmed takes software as an analogy for the genetic code of life, and then is giving a hypothetical future situation in which archaeologists are arguing whether human software was developed by evolutionary processes or intelligent design, and then he's not bothering to go back and check to see if the archaeological record of software would look like the fossil record of life or the genetic history of life. Yeah. And I'm actually not sure that he's going to go back to that.
The capabilities of the designer, even if it acknowledges a designer, or it denies the nature of the designer.
I don't even know what that means. I honestly don't know what that means, because let's say you say that, oh, there's a designer. We have evidence of the design of life, right? We have some analogy where we've seen something design life, or encountered something that truly can't evolve, and we demonstrate it reasonably well that just evolution just has no chance of really coming up with this particular thing. I don't know what that leads us to in terms of the nature of the designer one way or the other, right? It could be a god, it could be hyper-intelligent aliens, it could be, I don't know. I just don't see how inferring design then leads you to who the designer is.
And this is why, when you go back to the concept of, now you might ask your question, why do you accept that those humans created DOS in the first place? Because DOS is still software, and it seems like tidy and nice. It did the job, okay? And this is where the relation between something like abiogenesis, like the creation of life from non-life, and evolution comes. Because at the end of the day, evolutionists will have to find a good explanation for the existence of the first operating system, or the first cell.
Okay, first, there's no obligation for people to discover a particular thing in science. Like, people are working on it, but if they don't succeed, that's not necessarily a problem. But he's at least in the only area where there's kind of an okay-ish analogy. Because the thing is, abiogenesis is still very much an open question. And so you could have a similar open question like, well, how did the first software programs come to exist? Because let's say that, you know how the first software programs were on little paper punch cards, right?
Okay, yeah.
Well, that's very, very perishable. So we can assume that maybe none of those punch cards ever survived, right? And so maybe those first computers also didn't survive very well. So we can't tell that their input was paper punch cards. And you can say, well, these programming languages come into existence, you know, just out of the blue as far as we can tell, complete with sophisticated programs running on them. Okay, that does seem like it might be a problem. And then you might propose things like, well, maybe some other alien race came in and gave them some basic computing knowledge. And then that jump-started, you know, the human software development. Okay, fine. It's a hypothesis. And then you could have a whole bunch of people arguing about, like, the origin of computing as a concept among humanity. Just like you currently have people arguing about the origin of life. But the thing that it doesn't do is do anything to change the history of subsequent development of that software. So even if the mystery of abiogenesis is never solved, or even if it turns out that there simply isn't a viable physical mechanism that could happen without intelligent guidance, right? That doesn't do anything to evolution. Because the two things aren't the same. They're related, but they're not the same. And just because you believe in evolution doesn't mean that you're logically required to take a particular stance on the origin of life.
Yeah, and there's really days where I feel incredibly petty, and I want to flip some of these creationist, you know, platforms back on them, because they go, oh, well, you just want to, you know, accept evolution because you don't want to be responsible to a god. And you don't want to accept that evolution stands on its own without a god, because then you start getting some crazy existential crisis about the meaning of life and don't want to deal with the fact that meaning is something that we assign ourselves.
Yeah, that is actually a big part of, I think, a lot of what happens is that if someone finds evolution threatening for their particular faith, and their faith is where they get their basically their reason for continuing to live, and without a constant existential crisis. Because I mean, hey, let's be fair, existential crisis kind of sucks.
Indeed, they do.
Yeah. So I can get why that would be a good motive for you to want to reject basic science. But it doesn't make it right. And it doesn't make your projection of the same kind of motive. So
yeah. It's just one of those things where if you're getting petty and the arguments just devolve to, philosophical assertions and such, that's pretty much the only comeback that you can level at them, because if they're not going to provide evidence, then the only thing you have left is just a bunch of philosophical, navel gazing.
Mm-hmm.
That's why a lot of these debates, they just get so frustrating. They're exhausting to listen to. They repeat themselves because there's just no comparable amount of evidence for the creation side. And they have to resort to philosophical crap and bad arguments and, fallacies and whatnot. It's, ugh.
Yeah.
Hashtag over it.
Also, Ugly German Truth points out that punch cards weren't even originally developed for computers. They were used to direct looms that didn't really do any calculations per se.
Oh, today I learned.
Yeah. So,
thanks, Ugly German Truth.
Yeah, presumably the aliens would have to fail to find that too.
Well, we can ascribe to them any manner of, super intelligence or, mega capabilities, so why not?
Or any limitations that are convenient for them.
Exactly.
We're making these aliens up as we go. They can be whatever we need them to be.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like anything familiar in human history.
All right.
And because the first cell seems so ingenious at its own standing.
I'm sorry, this first cell seems so ingenious at its own standing. So apparently Ahmed has access to the first cell.
The first one, yeah. That's impressive.
Yeah, I would love to see where his write-up is about that, because that should be somewhere published, because my goodness.
That's groundbreaking.
Yeah, Ahmed apparently has the first cell, or at least a fossil of it. I would be very curious as to how he confirmed that what he has is the first cell.
I'm impressed that we got a cell to fossilize, but maybe I'm just ignorant of the overwhelming amount of fossilized cells that we have from that period.
Well, we don't have a huge number of fossilized cells, but they do exist.
Okay. To find the first one, though, that's quite a feat.
In fact, in China, there's a formation called the Dushantu Shale, or I guess it's actually a member of a larger formation, whatever. And it actually preserves a number of animal embryos at the stage where they're 4 or 8 cells big. You can actually, with a microscope, you can see the divisions of the embryos.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it's very cool, but it's also very confusing because there are no larger organisms preserved. So there was some kind of taphonomic process that was filtering out adult organisms and only allowing very small fossils of embryos.
Huh.
Yeah, and we're not really sure what explains that, because there must be adults, right? You don't get embryos if you don't have adults. So
well, unless that's the answer to the chicken and egg question.
Everything just starts as an embryo. Yeah, I guess
everything just starts fully embryo. There's no progenitor.
Well, also, actually, Ahmed is someone who likes to ask where are the 2- and 3-celled organisms. So there's a few things there. First, multicellularity doesn't generally go from 1 to 2 cells. But even if it did, you would then generally go from 2 to 4 to 8, and not to 3, 4, whatever. But also, there are 2-celled organisms.
Cool. Like what?
So there are a number of, especially bacteria, who typically form a complex of 2 cells that connect to each other and then cooperate. They're not technically multicellular because the cells aren't differentiated into different types, which is sort of the basic requirement for multicellularity. But yeah, they're two-celled organisms, essentially.
Cool.
But yeah, one of the things that animals probably evolved from something very similar to the sister group to animals, which is choanoflagellates, which are cells that are very much like animal cells, and they form a little sphere around a hollow in the middle, which, interestingly, is how embryos start out after the first few divisions. A sphere with a hollow in the middle. But then they have these little flagella that poke out from the sphere, and then they sense, things like chemical gradients in the environment and whatnot to know which cells should wiggle their flagella so that they can swim towards resources. And that's not actually multicellular because all those cells are identical. They all have the same role within the overall colony. But all it really takes is going from that to where you have a division of labor among the cells. So maybe you have some cells that are reproductive cells that focus just on new instances of the species. And then you have other cells that are just somatic cells. They just do all the regular choanoflagellate things except for dividing, make new organisms. And there you go. You just got multicellularity, and you skipped a 2-cell stage, and you went right to like a 16 or something like that stage.
Mm.
So,
Mackenzie Brown says there are so many dyadic. Did I pronounce that correctly?
I believe you did.
Organisms, and I'm sitting here thinking, what would it take for me to get at least not the same amount of education in biology that I got when I was in college astronomy, but at least, what would it take for me to acquire some up-to-date college level biology text and do some reading in my spare time, because this is incredibly fascinating, and I feel like I'm on the back foot here. Because growing up with all this creationist crap, you just kind of have a big stone wall for biology and things like that. Because you're like, oh, nope, I've already decided the way it happened, and all this is lies. I'm just going to memorize facts in order to get through the test, and then I'm going to flush it out of my brain.
By the way, so Tyler West says, we start out as donuts? No, so donuts are toroidal. We start out as spheres, hollow spheres, right? Although then humans do become, well, animals, generally speaking, bilaterians at least, then do become topologically toroidal after the blastopore connects from one end to the other to form the basis of the digestive tract. But then it gets a little bit more complicated, and very soon, once you get to things much more complicated than very, very simple organisms, it becomes unclear whether or not their topology is still like how many through holes does a human have? Can count a lot of different ways.
Mackenzie did remind me that MIT has open courses. I do remember seeing that. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah. And Mackenzie? Crap.
Mackenzie's a she.
Oh, Mackenzie, she. You know what? Mackenzie, Hedgehog, Avatar, also says you could get a slightly out-of-date bio textbook from a second. 3 college campuses near my office, and I know that all of them have at least decent quality bookstores, and the financial hurdle is not as much of an issue for me as it was when I was a student. So, thank you, NB. Mackenzie is a they.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Oh, thank you. I shall make a mental note.
We're both wrong.
Yep, that does happen occasionally.
It does.
I'm wrong a lot. You're wrong less often.
So Guptu says, if we start as a sphere, does that mean that ball really is life? It's at least a life stage. And then John Blackstar says hollow cell theory, more like hollow organism theory.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's going to be one of my new running jokes, hollow cell theory or whatnot, because this is from way back when we were doing these trolls to the flat earthers where Punchy was pretending to be a flat earther, so his name is Flunchy, and I decided I was going to argue for the concave earth.
Nice.
So I decided I was going to be concave-ish.
Nice.
So, maybe we can use that.
So I still remember the time that I argued with Flat Earth Aussie Jesus that the flat Earth was true, but the South Pole was actually the center of the flat Earth, and the sun circles around the South Pole.
Yes. Which
better explains the things that he actually sees in the sky. And he said how ridiculous it was, but couldn't actually say why it was ridiculous.
Of course not. Man, that guy is a really bad person.
Oh yeah, it turns out I didn't know that at the time. I've since been informed.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he is very bad person. His ethics and morals are highly questionable and in many cases garbage.
Yeah, sexist, racist, I think
White
homophobic,
supremacist.
white supremacist.
Not even,
yeah.
he doesn't even dog whistle it. Like, he's not even the kind of person that makes, like, little subtle comments that you might be able to take, you
Oh, no,
know,
it's
in
very
a
blatant.
genuine way. Oh, no. He's very out there, like, white
there's,
supremacist. So,
there's no question.
yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Like,
Anyway.
ugh. Anyway, back to better things. Better
Then this autonomous
question mark.
This is better than FEAJ.
Okay, yeah,
Ozzy.
you know what, I agree.
Yeah, this is way better. It's not quite as dumb, and it's way less morally horrifying.
The Nova Saber says the guy who claimed that we say sunset as a reference to the Egyptian god Set.
Wait, did he say that?
Wow.
I know he did once tell me that dinosaurs were probably biological weapons and genetically engineered by the ancients to fight their wars. Yep. That was a thing.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's...
Oh.
Look, his world building isn't all that bad. It's like, it would be an interesting setting for like a video game or like an RPG campaign or something.
software evolutionist
Maybe...
will
Sorry, go ahead.
I can't even finish.
Okay.
I thought it's too much.
have to even come up with an even more absurd proposition that, guess what? A blank computer existed, okay? And then the operating system itself, the very first operating system itself, came from just rubbish in the memory.
Okay, but dude, you're getting to the point where even you should be recognizing the degree to which your analogy is breaking down. Right? Because the thing is...
I don't know.
Well, so we do actually have observable, physical, non-intelligently directed phenomena that are relevant to abiogenesis, things like hypercycles or ribozymes that are RNA molecules auto-catalyze their own replication, either in a two-step or a single-step order. And hypercycles and ribozymes that can actually undergo natural selection to evolve to be more fit in the local environment. And I should probably back up a little bit and explain what ribozymes and hypercycles and things like that are, right? I'm using you, Vishanti,
Sure.
as my...
You know what? Yes. Just
Okay.
assume that I do not know this and explain it. As if I'm 5. Well, maybe not 5, but...
Hypercycles are basically instances of metabolism without a genetic component. So there are these cyclical chemical cycles that mimic what cells do in metabolism. So they take in some energy source, they break it apart in an exothermic reaction, and then use the energy from that reaction to then go further get more food. And this is basically how metabolism works at its most basic. And this can be self-sustaining as long as there's an energy gradient, which is also what life does, right? So life actually increases local entropy and then siphons off some of that excess energy that occurs in that energy gradient to power its own various processes. Then things like ribozymes are bits of RNA that can form relatively complicated shapes, and then they can do one of two things. Sometimes they simply take up amino acids and then create like a mirror copy, right? Because you know how DNA and RNA, they have opposite nucleotides that connect together. So some of them can make mirror copies, but some of them can also just directly copy themselves if there is, in fact, nucleic acids in their environment. And you can
Do those mirror copies have goatees?
Well, presumably, yes. Just like Mirror
That's what I
Spock.
thought. That's what I thought.
Okay. Which actually makes... Why wasn't there a mirror Doctor Strange who didn't have a goatee?
Well, I feel like that's because the character is unrecognizable in many senses. Actually, wait, no! No. The Strange Supreme that we saw get black bolted, he didn't have a goatee.
Oh, wait, really? I'm gonna have to rewatch.
Yeah, he was the one in the really super cool blue thing that didn't have a live cloak.
Okay.
Yeah. I just remembered that. I'm like, wait a minute.
All right, well, goatee
And
trope confirmed.
arguably, he was, in some definitions, kind of evil. If you eliminate, some realities with trillions of people, so... But yeah, he didn't have any facial hair, so...
Okay, alright, well, there you go. Anyway, so... And also, ribozymes can do things like create proteins, if there are the right materials there. And then, if you set a population of these up in various, laboratory conditions. You can actually even get them to evolve to be better at using the resources in the environment to catalyze their own reproduction. So, there are things like this. However, in nature, there's basically nothing that we've observed that gets you anywhere close to making a computer. Not even a little bit. So, well, I'm not going to say that we have the naturalistic explanation for the origin of life figured out. There's at least options. As far as I know, there are no current research avenues into the spontaneous creation of very basic computing systems. Unless you count brains, I guess, but then that just goes back to evolution.
Yeah, I don't know. This is one of those weird things where language can be such a help or hindrance. Because when you talk about, nature selecting things, it sometimes implies that there's an agency to the selection. I'm like, no, that's just the function of the surroundings of nature and all that stuff. And creationists tend to run with these descriptions, but they do it in bad faith.
Yeah, if you want
Nobody was shocked.
You want to see someone go crazy with bad faith takes on mild anthropomorphism in the scientific literature, look at Randy Galuza on my channel series Natural Selection Rebunked. Because, my goodness.
Oh my goodness, yes.
He's like, oh, look at all this implication of personality and agency to nature. And then I just look through basic sources like the dictionary. And I'm like, nope, no one's doing that. Sorry.
Yikes.
And then he's like, so I think it was God. I'm like, oh, okay. There's agency right there, but sure. The evolutionists are the one inappropriately ascribing agency to biology.
And yes, I am wasting time because these arguments are so painful.
Yeah, I know. I am too. But we're gonna plow through, and look, if it doesn't get somewhat better, we might not go through the whole video because I'm not going to go through another hour and 20 of just Ahmed saying, "Well, Windows exists."
It's just hem-hawing and not making any kind of real points.
Yeah. Honestly, I put them up because I wanted to change of pace to be two people who I kind of think of fondly, instead of people that I just generally despise. Because it gets old watching people I dislike actively. Thoros Rex for $5 says, "Hola, mis nerditos buenos. Dapper, do you mind if people DM you through Discord? Would love to talk dinos geology with you sometime." I do not mind. I cannot guarantee how much information I can give you depending on the questions, or how much time I can dedicate to the chat, because I am usually fairly busy. But you definitely can, and I'll respond when I have time, and to the extent that I know the answer to questions and whatnot. So yeah, feel free to reach out. Especially if we're especially if we're if you're one of the channel members or patrons. That it's one of the general unstated benefits is it's much easier to contact me in that case because I have a direct connection with the same server. Anyway.
And this created the first operating system. So it's really a continuum of the same philosophy, to the extent that the only way to get away from the absurdity of saying that software developed itself is to
which, remember, isn't actually absurd because software does develop itself. It's not the ones he's talking about. He's cherry picking at multiple stages here, right?
Completely annihilate even the first operating system being engineered. So even those who start with a position that is not like a hard atheist, at the end of the day, they will either have to reach a deistic model that, for example, there is God that created the first cell and then evolution took over, or
which, as far as I'm concerned, is a position that people can hold. In fact, I'm pretty sure plenty do. And he doesn't, but I'm wondering, why is he saying that this isn't an okay position? What reason is there for that?
My guess is that he just has to have some sort of God in there, even if people think it's the deist one.
Okay.
He just does not feel like natural processes or emergent properties is gonna get it done.
I actually think some of the problem might actually be theological, because while I'm not super knowledgeable about Ahmed's particular theological positions, there is actually a thread in Islamic theology that says that essentially all events are direct miracles. And so literally everything that happens is Allah making it happen that way. So like one of the examples is fire. This idea isn't hot. It's that whenever you start a fire, Allah releases heat directly from the fire, and he could absorb heat into the fire if he wanted to, just chooses not to every single time.
I feel like that's just needlessly complicated, but, you know, hey,
well, I'm not a Muslim, so. When you're omniscient and omnipotent, nothing is too complicated for you.
But yeah, I think you and I are basically saying the same thing. It's his theology won't allow him to accept a purely natural explanation for this. He has to have a god in there somewhere.
But here's the thing, right? Ahmed, if that's not your position, please let me know, because I'm not trying to impute that. I'm saying that's a possibility as to why he might want such an intrusive version of God in
Or because this is also nonsense, because if you agree that God created the first one, then why not he continued his work?
Because it evidently didn't happen, right? That's the thing. There is overwhelming evidence for universal common descent, and there isn't any evidence for subsequent tinkering after the origin of life by an intelligence. And so there's no reason to suppose it. And yes, the idea that God is the one who sets the first cell in motion and lets it evolve does ultimately come down to sort of a God of the gaps, right? You're sticking God in where we currently don't have a great scientific explanation. Okay, but God of the gaps is more intellectually honest than shoving God in where we know that there's no particular reason to.
Yeah.
So we have a naturalistic explanation, right? So it's more reasonable to say that God created the first cell than it is to say that God directly created bears, because we have a fossil record for bears, right?
Yeah.
Like
you just put them in the order you think they happened.
Oh, right. So what I'm saying is God of the gaps is better than shoving God into places where we know that there is no gap.
Yeah, and to kind of play off your previous comment is that God's creating literally every single thing that happens. The Nova Saber raises the point that to them the idea that literally everything is directly controlled by God is horrifying because it means a monstrous God who gives people cancer on purpose.
I mean, look, I don't
disagree. I know certain strains of Christianity that will say, oh, well, if you get cancer, it's something you did and it's a moral, judgment or whatever. And
I also know strains of Christianity that say that, yes, that is in fact the direct will of God.
Yeah.
So
just gross.
Yeah. But also, I can say the same thing about Islam. I know of strains of thoughts that would go in either way there, but also I do know of strains of Muslim or Islamic thought that don't actually go in either direction, and that do more of a, like, I don't quite want to say an open theism, but like a God isn't the direct causal agent for all the things that happen. And also, you have some kind of free will. Because there's actually a lot of tension between free will and determinism in Islamic theology. And you do get people arguing over it in a similar way to the way that you get Christians arguing over free will versus determinism. Not for entirely the same reasons, but for similar reasons.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're going to actually take a quick break because I am out of coffee, and I want to not be out of coffee. And also the fact that this is my third cup of coffee that I just polished off. I need to go take care of some biology. So we're gonna be back in just a little bit. Everybody, stick with us. I'm gonna get myself a fresh cup of Joe, not from the SCP coffee machine though, from the regular coffee machine.
Goodness.
sticking around. As I usually do after a break, I'll remind everybody that the channel is almost entirely supported through direct donations and pledges from my viewers. AdSense is, like, the actual ads from AdSense are basically worthless. So if you guys want to help support the channel and you aren't currently, there is a Patreon, as well linked in the description, as well as a wish list and a merch store. Any of those things would be great. There's also, you can join the channel. The channel memberships and the Patreon give you access to early access. You can get names in the credits depending on how much you opt to pledge. Get a 12-ish, I think, % discount. Patreon for going annual. And yeah, I think it's a reasonably good deal. I tried to make it reasonably good value for what you're getting for what you're paying for. If no, that's great. Just like the video and make sure you share it in places where you think people want to see this kind of thing would come and see it. And that helps a lot because, yeah, this channel only succeeds because of the direct support from my viewers. And I can't express enough how appreciative I am that they are actually supporting it to the point where it is, in fact, self-sustaining.
Dapper Dinosaurs was made possible by viewers like you.
Yeah, just like PBS.
Yeah.
Okay. But with that, there was a question from Mackenzie Brown, and then I'm going to read the super chat from Vandali 1998. So Mackenzie Brown had asked, and I'm paraphrasing here, where I find English language sources for Islamic theology. The internet is the big answer to that question. There are a lot of sources online, so you can find things like hadith collections, Sahih Bukhari, things like that online. You can find things like the writings of Ibn Khazali, various other theologians. And basically what I find is helpful is if I find reference to a work when I'm reading about Islamic theology, I'll note that down and then try and find that particular work in English so then I can go check on that. But it's not the easiest thing to find a lot of English language Islamic theology, but it's not as hard as it used to be. Because increasingly large numbers of Muslims in places like the United States, Canada, and the UK they're monolingual English speakers, or at least English L1 speakers, as opposed to having an L1 that's one of the languages more closely associated with Islam, like Arabic itself or Urdu, languages like that. I say like that as if those two languages were similar at all. They're really not. But like, languages that are common in predominantly Islamic areas like Turkish. So, or Persian, like I said, Urdu or Arabic and things.
Indonesia.
Yeah.
Pretty big one.
Yeah, Indonesia is the most populous majority country.
Yep.
It's also the country
I learned
with
that
the
this
most,
week.
Really?
Yeah.
It's the country with the most Muslims. The face of Islam, a lot of people think of it as being primarily Arabic, but like if you were to sample random Muslims from across the world, a whole lot of them would be South and
Nebulon. Pew, pew, pew.
So then Vandalia 1998 says, for $10, speaking of God of the Gaps, when I was thinking about theistic evolution, I was wondering if cosmic artificial God bred us like we breed dogs and plants and the plants we eat. I mean,
Ancient Aliens thinks that.
yeah, I mean, you could adapt that into like a theistic view. But then also Nebulon has gifted 5 Dapper Dino memberships. So Alea Jane, Laserfan17, Our Dying Sun, Eric 311. Yeah, 311, and Shade Dragon were all gifted memberships. So welcome, guys. Do remember to connect your Discord account to your YouTube account so that you can go hang out in the Discord server, and also check out my community tab for links to early access videos. So, and then thank you to my other channel members for sending tetrapods, which is, of course, how we normally welcome new members. Don't worry, once the 1 month is up, your gift membership will not auto-renew or anything, even if you have a credit card up with you. They will ask you directly if you would like to re-up or just continue on it without the membership. But they will not automatically charge your card or anything. So this is, in fact, a no-strings-attached gift membership. That's one of the things I was worried about when they first opened that up. Like, is YouTube going to start charging my gifted members without their consent? Because that's not okay.
Yeah, that's not cool.
Yeah, it turns
They
out
at least have enough sense,
Yeah.
for this.
Yeah, it turns out they will not be doing it. So I know, for one thing, I was gifted membership that then ran out, and I was then asked, hey, your gift membership ran out. I was like, oh, okay. Cool, thanks. Bye.
Close tab.
Right?
I will also say that because the internet is a great resource for people who are monolingual or just curious to learn about other religions or whatnot, the abundance of Jewish texts that have been made available for free on Sefaria.org has changed so many people's relationship and understanding to Judaism.
There you go.
Like, not only can you access the entire Tanakh or Hebrew Bible, you can also access in English all of Rashi's commentary,
That's
Rambam, most of Ibn Ezra, and they're adding more and more and more every day. They've even added some of the Hasidic commentaries. They put the Brown Driver Briggs dictionary on there finally after, people have been begging them. So you literally can read these sources for yourself and learn about, the history of Jewish text and what a lot of our texts say. And it's so cool. Like, oh my gosh.
But also, by putting the Brown Driver Briggs lexicon up online, it invalidates my purchase of the physical text. Because I own the physical text. So now what? I just wasted that money. No, I'm just But it was my first thought, like, oh, hey, I have that text. I guess I didn't have to.
I mean, it's nice to have a physical copy because you may not always have access to the internet at your house, or you may, notice edition differences or
mine's, I think, the
typos or something. So, yeah, but it is very exciting, and you can start your own. They call it a sheet, but it's basically a notepad that you can put in texts or your own commentaries or thoughts, and you can choose whether or not to share those with the community. So a lot of people, some of which are actual clergy, most of which are just lay people, have started their own little study sheets, and you can, video chat with people who want to read the same thing. And it honestly, it's one of my favorite developments in Judaism, period, over the last 15 years. So I'm super excited.
All right, well, I'm going to hit.
All right. Whoop.
Need guiding it. So at the end of the day, probably you will resolve that there is no designer, there has been no humans. Those computers were there because they were there. Software.
Wait, so now we're concluding there were no humans? I mean, there's a lot of evidence for humans that would probably be left behind besides computers, but okay. See, even on his own terms, this analogy is just getting worse and worse as time goes on.
It came out from nothing, and it kept developing into software. The humans that lived in the 19th and 20th and 21st century were just users of computers that kept developing themselves.
I was about to say 19th century computers, but I realized that technically there were mechanical computers in the 19th century that did things like compute range tables for artillery and such. They were basically just single-use calculators, but technically they count.
Mechanical calculators for things like star positions that have been around since,
That's true, yeah.
Since antiquity, so people could navigate.
Like the Antikythera mechanism.
Exactly,
which
that's precisely what I was thinking of, yeah.
Yeah, that was basically an ancient Greek.
With differential gears, that's so cool.
Yeah, it was very, very cool. Definitely evidence of aliens.
Oh yeah, for sure. Couldn't have been done by humans.
By accident. First computer came by accident. First software came by accident. Software kept developing by accident. All what humans did is selecting the best software in the market, and let's call them natural selection in this case.
Okay, something I find a little annoying is the enthusiasm that I can see with Rebecca for this completely absurd analogy, right? She's like, "Oh yeah, this is really good stuff." I'm like, "Oh my goodness, Rebecca, no, it's really not. This is worse than what you're normally exposed to when it comes to young. Most young Earth creationists know better than to use this analogy quite so directly."
I hope I have been not so boring and not so elaborate.
Well, unfortunately.
Yeah. Look, I'm going to say take a drink for that one, even though I'm just drinking coffee.
Yep, I literally was doing that, raising my mug as you were saying that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, my goodness. I should have added a finger or two of whiskey into this.
Oh my goodness.
Nah, it's still too early. I don't if I start drinking now, I'll just like fall asleep at like 5 p.m. and then wake up at 2 a.m. and it'll ruin my sleep cycle.
You're making a great point.
Is he?
No.
Because he's really not. He's just making a hilariously bad analogy and then taking like 20 minutes to explain the basics of it. But sure, he's making a wonderful point, Rebecca.
People are saying, well, we can't compare biology to computers.
No, we can.
Yes.
We can. It's just that the analogy breaks down very early on. Right? There are similarities, but
I'm the kind of person that will say don't compare them because people will rely more on the computer understanding that they have than a biological one. So I personally avoid it. But
I try to avoid it too, and I prefer that it not happen, but I can't say that it's always invalid to do so. I just think it's usually suboptimal. It's
suboptimal, and it is not, in my personal estimation, appropriate for a discussion on like abiogenesis. And
it's like playing Mario Brothers, but without holding down the button that lets you sprint. You didn't know about it because you're a dumb kid.
You just never decided to push the jump button.
Yeah, just
or
hold
the sprint button.
Well, I mean, it ends up being the same button, but yeah, you just never held it down.
You just never hold it down.
Yeah. Not speaking from experience or anything.
Oh no, of course not.
And I would say, that I think it's a great comparison because
it fits your biases. That's the actual reason you think it's a great comparison, Rebecca. Let's be honest. But let's hear what she actually says, because it probably won't be that.
Of all the, required design that is necessary.
I am going to go ahead and go out on a limb and say she is not going to actually give any examples of design that is necessary in life that then she can point to reasons why it couldn't evolve. I mean, I'm not, even if the reasons are bad, I don't think she's actually going to get to that point.
For computers, I think it's a great, I mean, there's so much that is analogous with the computer.
Here's another thing. Hardware for computers is only kind of designed by humans at this point. To a large extent, a lot of it is done by software that designs things like circuit board layouts, which are then produced by robots running software. We're really at the point where humans only kind of design computers, like the broadest sense. So, yeah.
Like, stop the Matrix.
Yeah, so at best, this analogy, if it worked, which it doesn't, might get you to a deist position. Maybe. Where there's a god who winds up everything at the start, and he just kind of lets it go. That's the most you could get out of this, even if it were a good analogy. Which, I mean, maybe that's the goal, right? Is to just get you to some kind of broad deistic idea, and then there's other things that Ahmed or Rebecca would get you to become a Christian or a Muslim, effectively. But even then, it's still not a good analogy, so it doesn't get you actually to deism, even.
Yeah.
Scenario. So I think it's a great one. And so I hope the point has been received, because it's clear to all of us, right, that computers did not develop by natural selection.
For the most part, I would agree. That is clear to all of us. I'll take a sip of coffee for Rebecca getting it right. As if we're doing the drinking rules for Tuesdays.
You know what? I got a sudden craving for Cheetos. I'm going to grab one quick.
Oh, okay, grab one Cheeto. That'll be great.
Even if we see some simple computers and some more complicated, we can't line them up and say that they developed by happenstance, right?
Cheeps.
Nice. Well, by happenstance, no, right? But we can actually line them up in an order of development, because it is the case that humans in design do, in fact, base designs off of previous designs. They don't do it in the same way with the same nested hierarchy that Descent with Modification does. In fact, I've even actually seen people use attempts at using nested hierarchies for man-made things in an attempt to say that, oh yeah, no, design actually does produce nested hierarchies. The problem is that they always fail because there are other equally valid hierarchies that could be imposed that are not the same as theirs. Whereas that is not the case for life, right? You can't actually validly say that cats are more closely related to humans than they are to dogs. It doesn't work. There's so many reasons why it's not the case. But you can't actually always do that with man-made things, right? So let's say you start with like vehicles, right? Say, okay, start with a whole category of vehicles, and then we'll put one which is machine powered in one group, or okay, like powered by something other than humans, one group, and then put human-powered vehicles in the other group. So things like bicycles, skateboards, scooters, not the motorized kind, the kind that has a handlebar and you just push off with your foot. Those go in the unhuman powered category. Well, then I can say, okay, well, what if my highest category is going to be wheeled versus unwheeled vessels? And then the scooter, or then things like sleds or sleighs are actually less closely related to bicycles. They're more closely related to snowmobiles. And see, there's no reason to prefer one or the other, right? Or I could do it by like engine cylinder or composition of the frame of the vehicle. There's no objective right way to start. Whereas if you look at organisms, even before evolution was understood, people were still putting them into essentially the same hierarchy that we have now because it is objectively verifiable. Cats are more similar to dogs than they are to humans, and there is no way around it. And there's a nested hierarchy. And you get it naturally with descent with modification. That's why you get it in languages. Why you get it with manuscript families like the Bible. But it's why you don't get it with intentionally designed things like vehicles and computers and designed software. Anyway, here we go.
We know that they were engineered, and it's the same with life.
Absolutely.
No, the first part, yes, we do know that software, generally speaking, was engineered. Not always, though, as we've pointed out many times. But we cannot say that about life. Because for one thing, we see life make developments, make adaptations without intentional design evident. In fact, in situations that largely preclude it, unless you're just going to import miracles and say that, like, the various lines of Lenski's bacteria were each individually tweaked by God in different ways, which, I mean, I guess you could say that. But it was very, very ad hoc.
You have to have something to select from, right?
Yes, that's what's called the population, right? So, like I said, we could actually have operating systems developed this way, right? So, I'll go through real quickly again how you could do this. So, let's say that you have some kind of selection criteria for your operating system, even if it's just average user rating, right? And then anytime there is a version of your operating system with a high enough user rating or high enough calculations per minute or whatever you set as the selection criteria, right? Your computer has a chance of downloading that one. But when you download that one from a peer, there's a chance that some of the code will then mutate, creating a new but related instance of, we'll just go with Windows, right? Okay, that would set up a population of peer-to-peer shared genetically evolving operating systems. And fatal errors, right, would obviously fail our selection criteria very hard, and so that would prompt a very swift download of a new version with a much higher fitness, had to have some kind of fitness function. But that could actually develop operating systems. We don't do that because it would probably take a whole lot of time to be constantly downloading operating systems, and there would always be like chances that your operating system would be particularly horrible at any given time when it's important. So for stability reasons and for the just not wanting to be constantly updating your operating system. That's not how we do it. It would almost be complicated.
David B. 22585 says, first filter, will it run Doom?
That is the first filter, yeah. Actually, I saw a meme that was like a police warn of Halloween candy running Doom. A little picture of like a Tootsie Roll that had like Doom running on it. It was amazing. Because pro tip, guys, no one's giving your kids drugs in their candy. Edibles are way too expensive for that crap.
Literally never happened. The only time any child has ever eaten poison Halloween candy was a guy trying to kill his own kid.
Yeah. Yep. There was also a case where someone poisoned a number of candy bars in a store, make it look like when he poisoned his wife's, it was a attack. Die from that, but also wasn't Halloween candy. Anyway, yeah. So there's reasons that we don't evolve operating systems that way, but there's no reason in principle that it wouldn't work. Because we do know that genetic algorithms do work in computing.
I'm not saying that you can't have selection, but you have to have something to select from.
Yep, the population, again. That's a thing. Evolution assumes that life exists. You can't counter evolution by saying we don't have a great grasp on abiogenesis, right? it's sort of like, let's say that we didn't have a great grasp of the Big Bang Theory, right? That doesn't negate the nebular hypothesis of solar system formation. Because the nebular hypothesis doesn't depend on the exact history of the universe being a particular way, right? Any number of possible histories for the past of the universe that at least get us to the nebula that then collapses into the sun and the planets and whatnot, that all of those would be sufficient for the nebular hypothesis of solar system formation. Similarly, if you see a car in a ditch on an icy road, you don't have to know where the car came from before it got to this patch of road to know that it ran into a patch of ice and then ran into the ditch. The previous history, as long as those many of them are possibilities, all that's required is to get the car to this road. Maybe it was coming from that person's house, maybe they were coming from work, maybe they're coming from a party, it doesn't matter. Evolution on its own doesn't care how life comes about. It assumes that there's life, we know there is life. So if you want to have and this is something that happens all the time with creationists. Look, creationists, you want to have a conversation about abiogenesis, go do it. But don't come to a conversation about evolution and then spend all your time on abiogenesis because it's dishonest and everyone knows it besides you.
If the people in the computer situation only had that, simple computer to choose from, then, we wouldn't have the wide variety. But you have to, even with life, for something to be selected, there has to be something to select from. And so if there's no engineer, if there's no designer of life, then there's nothing to select.
That is a non sequitur.
That's not correct.
That just doesn't follow at all. You have to assume that life requires a designer in order to say that a designer is necessary for evolution to select from life.
Wow, that was
actually
mega non sequitur.
Yeah, that's actually technically what begging the question is, where you assume you're consequent, and then use it to argue for your conclusion. You can't assume the conclusion is true to argue for the conclusion. Now, you can set up hypotheticals as sort of a prediction in terms of empirical stuff, right? Like, we assume that the Earth is round, and then we measure angles to the sun to get the radius or something, right? Like, okay, but that's an empirical argument. This is supposed to be some kind of like syllogism. It doesn't work that way.
Absolutely. And the reason I selected software, because I see people putting some comments.
So Brian Stevens says, wow, sometimes I hear something so stupid it's like flurfism. Flurferism. Here's the thing, right? Fundamentally, young Earth creationism, anti-evolution, and flat Earth they're just different sides of a multi-sided coin, right? It's all a basic science denial in favor of a particular interpretation of religious doctrine, which is not even generally accepted by members of that particular religious tradition. And so it's the same willingness to deny reality. The reason why I think anti-evolutionism is more prominent is ultimately because it hasn't been as long that we've known it's wrong. Right? Like, we've known the Earth as a globe, sort of as a species, at least to a large extent, for 3,000 years or something?
At least since about 200 BCE.
Yeah, so we'll just give it 2,000 years, just to be on the conservative side, give it a lower number than is likely. For about 2,000 years, it's been reasonably common knowledge throughout a lot of the planet that it is in fact a round planet. Evolution, though, it's really only been a thing for about 150 years in terms of how we now think about it. And even then, there was the eclipse of Darwinism, so it's really only closer to like 90-ish years it's really been the dominant idea in biology. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's more prominent. And you can see the same thing historically with things like heliocentrism. You can't really see it so much with the round Earth, at least not in like Europe. There really weren't any big prominent flat earthers in Europe after the Roman Empire, basically. But you do see it with like Christians writing about heliocentrism and using the same kinds of arguments that creationists use today to argue against heliocentrism. Like, it says here in the Bible that this is true, and look, we can use this complicated math of cycles and epicycles to explain the orbits, or not orbits, but the motions of the planets and the stars and the sun and the moon. And like, look, we have all these great explanations for how all of it works. It's like, yeah, but you didn't explain this. You can't explain these two things at the same time. You're internally inconsistent here. All this other crap. It's the same basic idea. I'm sure that the next big thing that comes about in science that destroys some particular religious group's particular idea about X or Y will have the same new move. Just keep on going. It'll always be the case that some people have deeply held beliefs that contradict some new finding in science, and then they will come up with absurd reasons to oppose the science.
NA says, Dapper, you should make a reference to Michael Heiser lectures on Genesis 1 to help the evangelical community figure out that they're behind on the times. I used to be somewhat okay with Michael Heiser because in some respects he does have a little bit of sense when it comes to science, but if you watch enough of his videos, you're going to figure out pretty quick that he's into, like, Nephilim and giants and things like that, so,
Oh, yeah, I do remember that. He's got some good stuff and some not so great stuff. I'll say that. He's definitely right about ancient aliens, though.
Yeah, oh yeah, he thinks it's total crap, but he also thinks they're like demons or something, so...
Well, you know.
The Nephilim or...
I'm just saying, I've never seen an ancient alien and a demon in the same room, so maybe they're the same. Alright, here we go.
The reason I selected software is that when you give this example, actually the example can work very well if I have selected cars or robots or anything else.
Actually, no. It works even worse there, because those things are even less analogous, but okay.
I can make it...
maybe not robots.
...as good if I select any machine, okay? But just to cut through the chase, because really, you know...
We're how far into this video and he wants to cut to the chase now?
We are about almost a half an hour in.
Bruh.
Yeah.
Don't spend half an hour before you get to your point. Come on.
Yeah, that's the basic rhetoric thing, right? Like, your point should be apparent from the beginning, and then you can go into an explanation, but even then, be concise.
And yes, ugly German truths, all those elaborate Nephilim ideas and reinterpretations do irk me, because it seems like each one is more ridiculous than the last.
It's just because you're not reading Enoch, and no, I'm not going to specify which book of Enoch.
Oh my god, thank you for knowing that there's more than one.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that you would know that, but goodness gracious. Book of Enoch, which one? What? Oh my god.
Yeah, most of those conspiracy theorists are actually pretty bad, even at the various sources that they think are important.
Wait, you're telling me there's 3 books of Enoch? 3 Enochs?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The majority of engineers and physicians that I know would immediately throw evolution, the theory of evolution, out of the window.
So the majority of people that you know in Egypt would throw a theory that is not actually their area of study out of the window. That's great. You guys remember Project Steve? Because I remember Project Steve. Let's see how Project Steve is doing. I'm just going to type it into Google. Project
While you're doing that,
Steve.
I'm going to answer the Vadim question. Book of Enoch is not in the Jewish tradition. It's not considered canonical, but it is in our tradition because it is a Jewish text. It's just not considered canon. So people do read it, people reference it, but we understand that it was written well after the alleged historical quote-unquote Enoch would have lived. So, yeah, it's interesting reading, but it's definitely a product of its time, being, you know, apocalyptic Judaism that's heavily influenced by Greco-Roman occupation. So, the Enbead asked, what do you think the Nephilim are? I personally think they're remnants of demigods in the Canaanite religion, but I don't know. I personally think that, well, my answer is going to take longer than we have here, so I will stick a pin on that and answer it potentially on Discord. Kuptu, gee, Billy, why does your mom let you have 3 Enochs? Exactly. Vadim subsequently asked, I mean, it's like theological text written by clergy, but not considered inspired.
I don't even think it's clear that it's written by clergy.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, the minimum requirement is that it was written by people who were literate, which was not super common. However, Judaism is a slightly different slant on what we consider, quote, inspired, because depending on your degree of theistness, I guess, it's either directly handed down to Moses at Mount Sinai, along with all the commentaries, or it's compiled over many generations by just regular human beings who are literate and want to forge an identity for this people that live in this place. So Judaism as a whole does not consider it what most people in the Western Hemisphere would consider, quote, inspired. It's just a cool text written at a period in history where Jewish apocalypticism was super popular. It gives you a lot of insight into the contemporary ideas of how they thought about demons and angels and the heavenly court and things like that. So, good reading, but
Nice.
Generally there's any kind of Jewish doctrine is not taken from Enoch.
So, I found the Project Steve information. So the Project Steve is something from the National Center for Science Education, which is basically a counter-creationist organization that is a nonprofit, and they basically, actually I think they're an official NGO, registered with the UN, but they basically advocate for the teaching of evolution in public schools, I think primarily in the USA, but they might be active elsewhere too. Anyway, so Ahmed's argument is basically just a variation on, look at this list of scientists who question evolution that I think it was ICR created. And they had like 1,000 signatures or something, right? But then you read it, and you realize that the statement that they're signing isn't actually like, oh, we think evolution is fake. It's like, oh, we encourage skeptical thought concerning evolution. Like, yeah, that's a normal science thing. And then a number of the people, signers, who then found out what it was being used for, then requested their names be taken off, a request which generally has not been honored. Yeah.
That's not cool.
So, also, of course, they were accepting basically anyone in any STEM field, no matter how related or not related to evolution that might be. So you could sign the list by being an electrical engineer, or, being a astronomer, the kind of thing that doesn't normally get you a great education in biology in the first place.
I'm impressed by people who have degrees in mathematics, but my friend, that does not mean that you're an expert in biology.
It does not. Look, the thing is, there are a lot of really tough to get degrees that are very impressive, but they don't make you experts outside the area of that degree. I'm a
doctor. I'm an expert in all things because I have PhD.
Not how it works. If you have a doctorate in astrophysics, that's great. You're probably an expert at astrophysics. You are no more equipped than any lay person when it comes to biology, unless you've actually then gone ahead and bothered to educate yourself to that point. There's no reason to think you have. If all we're doing is saying, I have a PhD in astrophysics. But anyway, Project Steve was by the NCSE, who had a similar statement in support of evolution as the central idea in biology, and they wanted to see how many signatures they could get. But the restriction is that in honor of Stephen Jay Gould, you can't sign the statement unless your first name is some variation on the name Steve from the Greek Stephanos. So like Stephanie, Stephanos, Esteban, all of those count, right? But if your name is like, something like Jonathan, yeah, that doesn't count. So
this is great.
Project Steve currently, as of October 21st, 2022, has 1,486 Steves who have signed the statement in support of evolution. Now, Steves make up approximately 1% of active STEM professionals. Approximately. Which means that, roughly speaking, to counter the 1,000 or so people doubting evolution, because this is just a popularity argument that Ahmed is making, the NCSE has managed to get the equivalent of 14,860 signatures from working scientists and engineers and what. So yeah, I don't care how many doctors or engineers Ahmed knows in a country that is relatively high in terms of rejection of evolution. So it's not a popularity contest, but even if it were, anti-evolution isn't going to win that popularity.
Nope.
Not even close. We're talking orders of magnitude away.
Well, it's an order of magnitude between friends, right?
Good point. But yeah, it's sort of like in the metal trade, right? If you have 0.99 fine, that counts as pure whatever it is. So like 0.99 fine gold is just counts as pure gold, right? No one's going to worry about the impurities that are obviously going to be in there. it's about the same level in terms of scientists who accept evolution. If the group of scientists were accepting evolution, you're going to say, does the entire group accept evolution? Use that same 0.99 standard? Then yes, the answer is yes. All scientists accept evolution within that standard of the error. The fact that there are a loud subset of them that are vanishingly small that disagree doesn't really change that. So even if it were a popularity contest, sorry, man, anti-evolution is just not winning. So here we go. Here's a little bit.
Now, there are times like this where I wish that aliens would roll up and just be like, yeah, it definitely evolved. These guys are wrong. They'd be like, no, it's demons. That's Project Bluebeam. I don't believe it.
All right, so we're going to see what else we get because we're almost done for today. But also, the more we delay, the more episodes of this there are to do.
Oh,
yeah, it's a double-edged sword when we delay these.
Played myself.
No.
Complete nonsense to us. It's complete nonsense to any engineer who has graduated from first-year engineering.
Okay, no, because I happen to know engineers personally. Like, I actually can go talk to them, who in fact do accept evolution and who have not just completed first-year engineering, but have their full engineering degree. Now, maybe he's being hyperbolic. Okay, but it's just not true. The majority of engineers accept evolution. Now,
but even if they didn't, they're engineers, not biologists.
Well, there's that too, right? You might as well say the majority of imams in my city don't accept evolution. I don't care.
You're like, okay, cool.
Great.
So what's your point?
Which also probably isn't true, because there are probably plenty of imams, wherever it is that Ahmed lives, that do not reject evolution.
Yeah.
Not even finished undergraduate, okay? It's complete nonsense. But why did I select software? It is because of the exact comments that the audience are putting, okay? Because software does replicate. Okay? You can actually, we typically create software that you can copy, okay?
Yeah.
Because if you create software that you cannot copy,
I'm not even sure how you could create software that would, in principle, be uncopyable. Like, I don't even know what that would mean.
Copy, regardless how good the software is, it's useless, because then you can only have it on one computer and that's it. Okay.
Well, that's not useless. It's useful for
but
that
also,
computer.
Yeah, I'm like, but networks are a thing.
Yeah,
did I miss his point?
I don't even. I think he's
What's the point?
I think the point is just that because software can be copied, that's analogous to reproduction. Therefore, it's a tighter analogy,
okay.
Which, I mean, it's true that does make it a tighter analogy because it can be directly copied, and that is in some ways analogous to reproduction with genetic code. So he's not wrong that makes it a better analogy. It doesn't make it a good analogy. It just makes it a better analogy than picking a car. Because you can't directly copy a car, I guess. Because software is fundamentally information. It's not really the physical state of your computer. It's the sequence of data that goes into the program. That is the program, right? That's why, hypothetically, you could store a software program in a physical book or on a final record or in your computer.
So we typically create software that can be copied. We also create software that
I would definitely copy. Look,
thank you, David B.
Yes, David.
To buy me back.
if I could copy someone's car and then I get a new car and they get to keep their car, I would 100% do that in a heartbeat. That's here's the basic thing about theft. You look up what theft is. It's depriving someone else of the use of their property for your benefit without their consent. Yeah, downloading a car wouldn't do that. It's one of the reasons why there has to be special categories for intellectual property, because under the normal definition of theft, the things that count as intellectual property theft don't actually constitute theft.
Yeah. But also, it's a car. How much could it cost? $10?
Never actually been to a dealership, have you?
copies itself. For example, computer hackers, they create viruses that are called worms, for example. And typically all viruses tend to copy themselves one way or the other.
I believe that's true as far as I know. I'm not a computer scientist, so check me if I'm wrong about that, but I believe that's the case.
But never in our history, and computer viruses produce millions and maybe billions and maybe trillions of copies of them. over the lifetime. But never have we seen a computer virus change into a video game or into a calculator app or into paintbrush or something.
Okay, but that's not what we would expect. We would expect it to become a more effective computer virus, right? Because the way it spreads is by infecting computers that then are networked to other computers. So let's look up. Let's just try.
I can, but good grief, he literally just used the whole "you've never seen in one kind produce another kind."
Yeah, right.
He just did it with computer viruses. Come on, man.
Oh, hey, look, there's whole books that have been published about the evolution of computer viruses and as a version of artificial life. Man, research of the computer virus evolution model. Okay. Oh, computers uncover 100,000 novel computer viruses in old genetic data.
Ooh.
Look at that. Evolvable malware from the ACM Digital Library.
How about it?
Look at that. It's almost like, while it's true that viruses don't tend to turn into computer games because that's not going to be selected for, when it comes to what they actually are selected for, which is ability to propagate and persist in network systems, they do evolve. Weird. My goodness, it's almost like this is a direct refutation of the entire point you're trying to make, Ahmed. And because, granted, they didn't evolve into the one thing or two things you specified that there's no reason to think they would in the first place. Yeah, that doesn't actually invalidate this fact that they do in fact evolve. Yeah. And Joel Duff comes in and says, yep, computer viruses do have a quote-unquote goal to become a stable computer program. Yeah. If they can stably operate in your computer without being quarantined or deleted and spread, that's actually good for the virus. In fact, the ideal computer virus from the computer virus's point would be one that's relatively small and relatively innocuous that you don't notice. Mm-hmm. So that way it can just sit on your computer without taking up so much space that you notice that there's a big file sitting around. And then it just quietly spreads to other computers and it just persists that way. The more noticeable it is.
Very similar to the way the viruses work in the real world. You know, they want to spread and reproduce. So if they kill every single person before they have the chance to, like, reproduce, that's not going to be good for them. So they need to be just not deadly enough to give time to reproduce.
Yep. And so, yeah, we do in fact see the evolution of computer viruses in real time. But guys, we've been going for about 2 hours. It's time to start wrapping up. Ashanti, do you have anything coming up?
Just more stress, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, if there's anything we can do to help alleviate stress.
Hello, Southern California people. If you want to run a rope, hit me up.
There you go. I don't know. Someone in the 77 people here might be from SoCal.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, guys, let's take a look at what's coming up on the channel here.
Oh, and yes, Ugly German Truce, I am aware that want was a very anthropomorphic term. The goal of biological organisms, and even viruses, which are not technically alive, is to reproduce.
Even goal. Very anthropomorphic. Yeah. It's almost like it's very hard to speak about things without some anthropomorphism, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's just, viruses do be propagating, so...
All right, so I don't have all of the details of what my plan is, but on the 31st, I do want to hang out on my member and patron server, just stream some spooky movies. I haven't selected which ones or which times, but I'm probably just going to do like 3 or 4 spooky movies in a row, just on there. So that'll be sort of a drop-in, drop-out kind of thing, that if you're a channel member or a patron, have access to that through the Patreon channel member Discord. On the 1st, we should be doing Kent with Bent 95, I think it's 95. Then on Thursday, the 3rd and final episode of Natural Selection Rebunked should be out. On the 5th, I'm trying to organize a tracked reading instead of the next Dapper Reacts. So,
I am so down.
Yeah, well, we already had one for Jack Chick. Trying to see if I want to get the previous crew together, right?
Oh, same cool, yeah.
Crew.
Heck yeah.
Which meant that I wanted Cheshire Vic there,
Yep.
She's pretty good at reading those tracts. But she's currently in the midst of a move, and her internet is not back. In fact, when I asked her to be on, she ended up having to go to like a cafe to use their Wi-Fi to be able to reliably communicate with me.
Oh man.
So, but she's hoping to have that back up, I think, soon.
Okay.
Soon TM, right? Like, who knows what that means? But,
yeah.
So hopefully that means that in time for the 5th. If that's the case, then we're going to do some tract reading. Yeah. For one thing, I found a tract by Dwayne Gish.
It's so bad, y'all.
It starts out with kids saying how excited they are to hear about creation science and how skeptical they've always been of evolution, and then some guy telling Dwayne Gish that this is the biggest turnout for a speaker that they've ever had. It's like, Dwayne, buddy, this is extremely cringy, dude. Extremely
that was
cringy.
written. It was written in the 90s, right?
I think it was written in the 80s.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, was this the time where those big Christian organizations would like come to a school and do all the flashy stunts and rip phone books in half and then invite everyone to a church service that evening?
I don't honestly know. It was that time. So let's take a look. I'm going to look a little bit further down. So the 8th. So right now it looks like Eric with Erica is probably on a more or less indefinite hiatus while Erica is extremely busy with trying to finish up her PhD, as well as having way more TA assistants like responsibilities that is probably reasonable for not nearly enough pay for the amount of work she's doing. Because basically the TA system is more or less a scam.
Yep.
But then on Thursday the 10th, we should be starting up a new series on the channel that I'm going to double check which one it is. I think it's going to be about Robert Carter. Yep, looks like it's Rob Carter. So we're going to have, I think, a 4-episode series on Rob Carter. About basically he gets virtually everything about evolution, which is embarrassing because, you know, he's an actual biologist. So.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. For those of you who have access to early access stuff, I am about to probably Monday finish up a video out for early access. So it'll be an ICR podcast where basically some creations straight out of the 70s are going to give us the dumbest takes on zoology. Just the dumbest takes.
For those of you that just got your channel membership, head up those early access, man, because he's at least like a month ahead, if not sometimes 2, so.
I'm currently close to 4.
I mean, I'm just saying, it's the best perk for me.
Thank you.
Is getting the early access. Like, emojis in the chat is neat, but in terms of just like,
oh yeah,
being able to watch this stuff early, it's much better.
Right now you could probably binge about an extra 6 hours or something. Hyper Dino.
Yep.
All right, guys. Well,
and you get to leave comments before the video goes live, so people think you're magic.
Yeah, like how'd you get a comment 3 months before this video went live? Well, all right, guys. So thank you very much. I really appreciate everyone being here. I hope you guys had fun, and I hope I see all of you on Tuesday. Thanks for watching, but before you go, I just want to say a special thank you to my channel members and my patrons, especially those pledging $20 or above. Bob Knob, Work in Progress, Benthoven, Cynically Skeptic, Denny5252, Ian Chen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, McSpooks, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, and Patrick Dennis. As you probably know, YouTube is a very volatile platform, and from month to month my income on the channel can swing wildly. But the people you see on screen are directly supporting so that I don't have to worry too much about that, and the channel can keep going as it is, and perhaps even improving. If you'd like to join this team, there are links below to join the channel or in the description to join the Patreon. The Patreon starts as low as $1 a month, and the channel memberships start as low as $1.99 a month. On Patreon, you can even get a discount for pledging annually. If you do decide to pledge, you'll get access to an exclusive Discord server just for channel supporters, as well as early access to all of my pre-recorded videos, often up to 2 months in advance. Higher tiers will unlock even better perks. Now, if an annual or monthly pledge isn't right for you, but you still want to support the channel, there is a merch store down in the description, as well as an Amazon wishlist, just for me. And if financial support isn't something you can or want to do, then if you still want to help out the channel, please just like and share these videos and make sure you comment on them. It really helps the channel out.